So this is it's a charged and controversial topic, as you're well aware, and it's the reason it's at all sort of an ethically interesting topic or important topic to discuss is because we're talking about children having to make decisions about their health and medical interventions. No one really or should really care so much what an adult does to their body, because they're the only real stakeholder, and we know the adult mind has matured enough to make certain kinds of decisions. But trans children face a very tricky sort of catch-22, almost like paradox, where if in order to have a shot at having the body they see themselves in, they need to start with medical interventions before puberty, at the very least puberty blockers. But precisely because they're that young, we have to have some kind of standard to allow them to make those kinds of decisions that's different than what we would require of an adult, which is really not much at all. And so I think especially anyone with kids, I don't have kids yet, but I plan to one day. Parents are imagining what do I do when my 10-year-old, 11-year-old, or 5-year-old for that matter comes to me and says, mommy, I'm a boy, mommy, I'm a girl. And so like, do you interpret that initially? Do you just wait and see? So this is the predicament that many parents are in, and all parents probably can imagine themselves being in. And what I find interesting about obviously the biggest concern a parent would have is that this is just a phase. I don't want my kid to do something that's irreversible or go through any kind of medical procedure that they're going to grow out of. And so that's, I think, the main concern. And your clinic and really any responsible clinic has, addresses this concern pretty straight on, in that there's a system of meetings and education that doesn't just, that weans out the kids who are not really trans as a stable identity, and only applies treatment to those that are not going to regret it. So I think that's a very interesting and important feature here that I want you to walk me through. So like, day one, my kid has told me that they're trans, and I bring them into your clinic. What is the process like from the very beginning?
Yeah, and Coleman, look, you've just touched on many of the issues that we face on a daily basis, and many of the questions we get from parents too about what do I do in this situation that I find myself in. One of the key concepts before we get into the process of what we do is that when we talk to these young people, whether it's a very young child, and we have referrals that come in from families where the child is as young as 3 years old, to referrals that we get from those who are mid and late adolescents, is that for them it doesn't feel like a choice. So for these young people that are in a situation where they feel their gender doesn't align with their sex that was assigned at birth, for them it isn't a choice about do I live in this way? Do I transition, or do I face the world expressing myself as I need to? It's often an absolute inner desire to do so, and if they're not able to express themselves in that way, if they're unable to be genuine about who they are and show their authentic self, it's highly, highly distressing for them. So what is important for us is that we, first of all, listen to the young person and the parents, because obviously important to consider their their situation as a family and the environment that they're living in. But we listen and hear from them what they need to be happy and fulfilled, and to function well as a person and as a family. So that's the first main point. And I have to say that of the hundreds, we've seen thousands of young people through our clinic, the stories are never the same. So each person that comes in has their own story and their own set of circumstances. And there isn't a cookie cutter kind of approach to this. We have a very well prescribed system that's multidisciplinary and involves clinicians across mental health, psychology and psychiatry, social work. We have paediatricians and endocrinologists and gynecologists. We have so many different specialists. And whilst everyone has access to whoever they need, some need input from some specialties more than others. Some people are very sure, some people are really unsure, and some people feel a real sense of urgency that something has to be done, and others don't want anything to be done. They just want to come in and talk and try and help understand how they're feeling. So to get back to your question, Coleman, sorry, it was a very long-winded way of preempting it, but when we receive a referral, it depends on how old the young person is to how we approach it. So, for example, if someone is 3 or 4 years of age, of course, there's not going to be any intervention as such, apart from really talking to that child and watching them play and seeing them interact with their family members and discussing with their parents what they need to feel supported, whichever way it may go, whether this young person identifies as trans and grows up and wants to transition, or whether this is something that they're expressing now that may evolve in another way. So for a 3 or 4 year old, it's just really we assign them a person to talk to, usually a psychologist or psychiatrist, and then they take that journey with adjustments over the years for what they may need. If someone comes in and they're pre-pubertal, in that peripubertal age, so somewhere between 8 and 13, then we take a different approach, because it's at that time that they may be expressing that they'd really like to start on puberty blockers. They may have really intense sense of anxiety, this sort of anticipatory anxiety about what will happen when they go through puberty. Or they might be on the cusp of puberty or starting puberty, where they're experiencing changes of their body where they become extraordinarily distressed. It's around age 11 and 12 that we see a big jump in referrals, because often it's when they start to experience their body changing that they really they really experience that sense of sometimes panic or distress that it doesn't feel right for them, and a sense that they can't stop it. It's progressing. It's outside of their control, and they really, really don't want it to happen. So around that age, around that peripubertal age, they are allocated a mental health clinician who they see initially for 3 or 4 sessions, and then a paediatrician joins them for the 4th session, where we talk about medical options depending on where things are at. And to be honest, for the vast majority, it takes longer than that to work through what is best for that young person. And of course, there are not just assessments in terms of talking and working out how that young person feels and where they want to go in the future, but we also worry about the medical side of things. So we do blood tests, we check bone density, we talk to them about fertility preservation, and the risks and benefits of doing interventions from that perspective, and happy to go into detail with that, but that's a whole nother conversation. And then there are the older kids, so those that present when they're past puberty, where puberty blockers aren't really indicated because they're not going to have much impact on the physical side of things. But these young people are just as distressed often about how they feel about themselves, and have come to the realisation about their trans identity a bit later on. And whilst they are distressed and want to transition, they're older and more independent in their kind of living and in their decision making. And whilst we still involve parents at that age, it becomes much more of an interaction between the doctor and the young person, where we, I guess, spend more time with the adolescent just solely on their own, and try and work through what's going to be best for them. So I think all up, when you look at the amount of time we spend with young people and families, it depends on their age, it depends on their circumstances, depends on their sense of urgency and their mental health status. And we adjust and individualise to make sure that we get the best outcomes we can.
And is everyone, are all the patients at your clinic 18 or below?
When they are referred to us, we accept referrals only if someone is under 17. There's an adult service that takes the referrals when they're older than that. Unfortunately for us, we've had this extraordinarily large rise in referrals over the last 10 years, which is consistent with gender services across Australia, but also across the Western world, where we haven't been able to keep up with the demand with our current resources. We're very fortunate here in Melbourne that we've got a very supportive government who's just given us an increase in our funding, and we're just about to expand the services, not just at the Royal Children's Hospital, but with our partner hospitals and health services. And what we'll be doing is taking this multidisciplinary approach and expanding it out across Victoria for the adolescent age group. But what we're finding is that with this increase in demand, there has developed long waiting lists, and unfortunately, whilst we've got this sort of complex, collaborative, multidisciplinary approach, many young people are spending a long period of time waiting to get into those services. And whilst we're linking them in with community-based services for mental health to try and make sure that they're safe from a self-harm perspective, and to start working through some of the concerns they may have. With COVID pandemic, there's been a huge demand on mental health services across the country. Sure, it's actually an international phenomenon, and it's increasingly difficult to access that care.